Joining me now is South Australian Liberal Senator Alex Antic. Alex, the foreign-owned pub chain Australian Venues Co. that banned Australia Day celebrations at its 200-plus venues across the country has now issued an apology for causing what it calls concern and confusion. And of course, this apology only came after there was a massive backlash and calls for boycotts. Let's roll the list of the venues this mob operates. Alex, it seems these corporate virtue signallers have learned nothing from the Voice referendum. They continue to play these divisive political games.
Yeah, Rita, I mean, it seems that the sort of the life cycle of wokeness now for the corporates is about 24 hours, because that's about how long it took to turn the whole thing around. It's getting increasingly quick, and it's just staggering that any of them are still continuing to push these kind of agendas through their businesses. I mean, it's bizarre. Michael Jordan, of course, famously once said, when he was asked why he wasn't more politically involved, words to the effect of, well, Republicans buy sneakers too. But in 2024, in these sort of businesses are learning that lesson very, very slowly. I think my advice to them would be, if you're sitting around the boardroom table and you've got your advertising people there in future, just do the opposite of what they suggest, and you'll probably be on a winner. Otherwise, you're going to end up down the same track as Gillette and with their toxic masculinity campaign, if you remember, from a few years back, and then Bud Light last year, who also are on the receiving end. They're very slow learners, Rita, very.
But we've seen that right here in Australia only last year, where there was a lot of, there weren't boycotts, but people were upset by the big corporates getting involved in the Voice referendum, advocating for one side exclusively, and almost putting pressure on their customers, their staff, their stakeholders to vote a certain way in a divisive referendum. And they were on the wrong side, it turned out, and they haven't seemed to have learned anything. It'll be interesting to see if this is forgiven and forgotten, or people like the Bud Light experience going to say, stuff your apology, we're going to go elsewhere. There's lots of options when it comes to pubs and clubs. Now, Alex, the Albanese government did have a big win last week, passing a world-first social media ban for under 16s. You were one of the few in the coalition to vote against this bill. And this legislation, it's not only harebrained, Alex. Ideologically, it is confused, to say the least. And it comes with a whole bunch of unintended consequences. Tell me, you know this bill better than most. How is a 65-year-old going to establish they're over 16 so they can use Facebook without submitting to digital ID or providing their passport or driver's license to the social media site to identify themselves?
Well, this, of course, was the subject of what very limited debate we had last week on the bill, which was one of the main problems. I mean, this was extraordinarily complicated stuff that was rushed through in about an hour. We were lucky to get that, as Labor busted through about 30 bills at the end of the week. So that was one of the questions. The answer is less clear, though, it has to be said. If it's not digital ID, which I think it still can be, by the way, I don't think that's been completely ruled out by the amendment that was made, and it's not handing over documents, then what is it? Well, I asked that question, and of course the answer to that is biometrics. These companies are going to scan our faces, our children's faces, and use that information to determine how old you are. And if you're close, if there'd obviously be a margin of error, then they'll start asking the questions. And I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but that alone is enough for me to have crossed the floor on this. I just can't support that. I can't support the speed with which it went through. We got the bill on a Thursday. It went to a very brief 3-hour Senate hearing on the Monday. The bill came to us on the Tuesday, and it was passed shortly after that. So, I mean, you know, by the way, though, we found time during that week to do all sorts of other things, censure motions and suspending people and, valedictory speeches. But when it came to actually drilling down into this world first piece of censorship law, we didn't have the time. So what's going on up in that building, I don't know.
I do wonder if it's ever going to be implemented, given the massive issues with having any sort of adherence to this that is palatable to people? Because I think this is a sort of policy, particularly for those who don't really use social media, which sounds good in theory. Oh, yes, social media does harm to under 16, let's ban it. But as soon as you start scrutinising the policy, you see it comes with huge issues. What do you if the coalition wins, the coalition back this, most of the MPs back this, will you be implementing it, and will that mean that you're going to give the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner even more power?
Well, I mean, I hope not, but this has passed. It will go through an implementation phase, bureaucratic speak, for let's see if we can make it work. And the idea is that it'd be in force by 2026. So what the hurry was the last sitting week of the year is anybody's guess. But, the answer to that is we don't know. I mean, there's so many things we don't know. Within a space of a week, we were told YouTube was out, Snapchat was in, then Snapchat was in and YouTube was out. So, I mean, I don't think anybody really knows how this is going to work or if it's going to work and if it's going to fix this problem that we're talking about, which we're all sympathetic to, kids getting bullied online. No one wants that. But the problem is throwing out the baby with the bathwater here. And the other problem is kids are getting legitimate news sources from social media. There are many kids in remote locations that use this as a way of interacting, and there are many kids with learning difficulties that rely on a lot of these products as well. So, look, I don't know if it's workable. I doubt that it will be, but we're gonna let the bureaucrats take it from here. Over to you, boys.
Yeah, this is just so short-sighted. And you're right. Kids, people of all ages get their news from social media, even if it's coming through a mainstream media network. And I'd much rather kids be watching podcasters on YouTube than, I don't know, exclusively reading The Guardian or the ABC. They probably have a much more nuanced view of the world if they were watching YouTube as opposed to the ABC. Before you go, Alex, I want to get your thoughts on the ABC chair, Kim Williams, and his bizarre attack against podcaster Joe Rogan, saying he's deeply repulsive and other slurs. He's now labelled the backlash against him as demonic. This man is prone to a bit of hyperbole, isn't he? What do you make of this entire bizarre episode?
Well, I mean, when I first read it, I could be wrong about this, but I read that he didn't really know much about Joe Rogan, but then found him deeply repulsive, or whatever the language was, which I thought was kind of contradictory in its first step. But he clearly hasn't watched or listened to the Joe Rogan experience. I mean, Joe Rogan is the sort of guy who probably would share a lot of fairly left-wing views, libertarian views as well. I mean, he backed Donald Trump, but I don't know whether or not the left are now punishing him for that. Maybe, who knows? But I don't see anything other than pretty considered, pretty sensible, and very, very interesting commentary coming from there. I would spend more of my time listening to the Joe Rogan experience than I would opening up a newspaper or listening to talkback radio in this country and state, to be absolutely honest. And that's what the kids are doing. They're picking up their news. The generation, by the way, that we were told had a 10-second attention span are now listening to 3-hour deep dive discussions about serious subjects. So what's deeply repulsive about that is anyone's guess. I think it'd do Mr. Williams the world of good to actually go and have a listen to one of these podcasts. Might change his mind.
He embarrassed himself, and I think he really put into question whether he's fit for that role. He seems to be so completely out of touch with the modern media environment and how people consume news, and to make those sorts of comments about a personality whose work you don't even know. Again, you've got to question his judgment. Listen to a podcast, and then if that's your opinion, at least it comes from a informed position. Senator Alex Antic, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks, Rita.